Okay, so the next presentation is from A.Keeling and C.Beckett from Memorial University in Canada. I see that Aaron is already connect.
Yes, hello, are you hear me?
Also. Hello, Aaron. Yes,
Fantastic,
we can.
thank you.
Can
I
you
will
please
do
share
so
your
just
screen?
now, and we'll make sure that everybody sees that.
Yes, that's good. Thanks.
Yes, there we go. Thanks very much for hosting us. Thanks to Margarita for the invitation and the European Cultural Center for hosting us. I'm presenting with C.Beckett, who is also on the line here. And so we're going to try and go back and forth and hopefully present this reasonably smoothly. I'll be operating the slides. So we are geographers at in the Department of Geography at Memorial University. And you can see our title there. Give this more of as much a methodology talk as it is a design and landscape. See some of the connections between some of the, I guess, material considerations that have already been referenced so far, and some of the process-based and political and even ethical in this talk. Just as we get started, and I'm going to make sure, yep, there we go, I can click through. We wanted to offer a territorial acknowledgement that our research is being conducted on Akecho Treaty 8 territory, Cascadena territory, and the Inuit territory of Nunavik, with the consent and collaboration of some members of those Indigenous communities. We do this in part as, again, an acknowledgement of their territorial sovereignty and their participation in co-directing this research in a variety of ways, but also to maybe highlight for those who may not be as familiar with the Canadian context, that the settler colonial context of Canada is very much in the foreground of this research. As a settler colony has both historically and in contemporary terms resulted in a particular kind of relationship between non-Indigenous and Indigenous communities here. And part of what this research is doing is trying to address and place in focus how that settler colonial context and its contemporary manifestations really shape how we approach both resource development, but also, of course, industrial reclamation and rehabilitation activities. Resource development was very much a key driver of settler colonial expansion in Canada, and especially in Northern Canada. And we'll be highlighting in many ways how that context, bringing that context to the fore really shapes the process, but also we think the product of mine reclamation and rehabilitation activities. We are settler scholars, so we are non-Indigenous scholars and working in collab and trying in many ways to center their priorities and participations. So actually, just before I move on, I'll kind of set some very general context and then turn it over to Caitlin for some of the conceptual claims, I guess, underlying some of our work. You can see some of the sponsors of this research listed below. In particular, the one in the middle, the TerraNet, is a very interesting interdisciplinary group of both engineers, geochemists, and people involved in the technical side of mine remediation, as well as social researchers. And the goals of our group, which are the social science research in the group, is to conduct participatory research into closure and remediation planning at extractive sites, both active and abandoned mine sites, and to facilitate the participation of Indigenous communities and their inclusion of their knowledge in these kinds of processes. So the kind of bigger questions that we're really addressing through this research is how mine closure and remediation activities can better incorporate Indigenous community participation and values. What are the best mechanisms and processes for doing so? And what is the role of our research and as researchers, both scientific and or social scientific and participatory research? So again, we're focused as much on methods, values, and ethics in this talk, and a bit of theory as well, since these engagements remain very much in progress. And we'll be highlighting two of the main case study activities that we're engaged with. So now, Caitlin, I'll turn it over to you to give us some of this conceptual and theoretical context.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Awesome. I apologize. My internet connect across the screen. So as Arn mentioned, my name is Caitlin. I'm actually coming to you from Whitehorse, Yukon this morning. So I live on Tongwichan and Kwanlin territory here in Whitehorse, and I'm working with the Ross River Casca Nation here in Yukon on the Faro remediation project, in addition to the cases and territories that Arn will talk about as well. So I just wanted to start off with a bit of a conceptual framework of how we're thinking about remediation and reclamation, rehabilitation. Different words are used for different processes and in different geographies. So I'll refer to remediation as that's what it is here. Okay, so mine remediation, we want to see it as an environmental controversy. So in our recent paper in Local Environment, we highlighted that remediation is highly technical, inaccessible. So my plans and policies are not written in language dominated by technical experts and regulatory agencies. So we use these term rendered technical here, where expertise excludes community understandings of environmental violence, contamination, remediation, and healing. So while planning processes for remediation employ the language of rejuvenation, restoration, and reconciliation, these terms are used within the confines of state-led neoliberal spaces of Western science and industry, and are premised on linear notions of progress and improvement. In addition, the community effort and knowledge that goes into reclaiming land, cultural practices, and governance structures, and more than human relationships, is not articulated in mainstream remediation or in environmental assessment discourses. In addition to this exclusion from remediation practices and regulatory systems, remediation sites, the ones that we're working on anyway, are often perpetually toxic. And so we're looking at what that means beyond the material contamination as well. And so typical remediation approaches, we argue, tend to reinforce the exclusion of local communities, as I mentioned, and the public at large from mine remediation planning. And it also downplays their concerns about living with long-term environmental degradation and toxicity, even after it's mitigated or remediated. So this is a particular and persist for long periods of time post-mining or in perpetuity. So this is connected to what Arn was talking about in our research of looking specifically at the settler colonial colonial context
Caitlin, sorry,
of mine
can I ask you to speak a little bit slower, please?
Yeah, no problem. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Sorry.
So as Arn was mentioning, we're doing this research within the context of settler colonialism and resource colonialism in Northern Canada. And so in excluding local community knowledge and values, mine remediation activities often threaten to overlook or indeed reproduce historical injustices, environmental violence, and colonial relationships associated with the original development, despite the premise of remediation making things better or making things green. I'm gonna switch to the next slide. Okay, and so in the process of rethinking remediation, we suggest some of these processes requiring an opening up of mine closure and remediation, especially within environmental assessment practices and within the planning process for, before you even get to mine closure. And so this is to include a wider range of issues and participants than are typically considered, including their historical, social, economic, and cultural dimensions. This is a kind of reference to social closure literature or mining transition approach, which is talked about in other work as well. And so this moves beyond a superficial inclusion of local and indigenous knowledge and remediation planning towards an articulation of what it means to unsettle remediation and actually reclaim contaminated lands, and land in the sense of a broader sense of culture and language as well. And so legal scholar Rebecca Sosi calls an ethics of remediation, and looking at a holistic conceptualization of mine remediation, we seek to contribute to an ethics of remediation that counters the epistemic injustice of technical closure planning processes. And so in Sosi's vision, remediation should center Indigenous sovereignty and self-determination as intrinsic to repairing relationships between people and land. It should also incorporate Indigenous land values and knowledges and attend to the reparative justice for past harms, including various strategies of compensation, restitution, and apologies or memorialization. And so this entails a strategy of recovery of post-mining lands and communities that is rooted in relational accountability and the co-production of knowledge and environmental futures.
Just want to
Thanks,
precise
Caitlin.
that you have 5 minutes left for your presentation. Sorry. Thank you very much.
Okay, perfect. We'll move very quickly then through this so that we can at least touch on our case studies. So we're drawing inspiration in this methodologically from science and technology studies as well as Indigenous methodologies to move beyond simply critiquing technical and technocratic processes and moving towards co-production of knowledge and participatory engagement in environmental management. And this has been described in the literature as cosmopolitical experiments in the science and technology studies literature. So essentially this involves staging or intervening in particular kinds of experimental situations between scientific and technical controversies. So the goal here is to enact a transformative knowledge politics around mine remediation that slows down the reasoning of established experts and attends to local knowledge and local concerns, therefore making decision-making more transparent and accountable, and again, in a way, allowing communities then to take the time they need and on the terms that they have to address some of the challenges that they regard in remediation processes on their landscape. So now, Caitlin, I'll turn it back to you to talk briefly about the Faro case.
Okay, so I will go through this really quickly, but just a bit of context is that Faro or Cypress Anvil mine is an abandoned lead zinc mine. It's located in the Zezul Mountain Valley, which is Kasba-Zila region of Ross River Cascadena territory. So this is in southeastern Yukon. The mine was illegally developed on unceded territory, so there was no land claim or treaty. And subsequently, it was abandoned in 1998. And so now it's a federally managed contaminated site. It's also one of the largest contaminated sites in Canada. So it's been undergoing remediation planning since 2000. So it's over 20 years of remediation planning now, and it's going through an environmental assessment process. In Yukon, it's called Yukon Environmental and Socioeconomic Assessment Board. The Ross River Dena Council has tracked a long history of dispossession from resources and land due to the mining operations, in addition to experiences of racial, gendered, and environmental injustices. And since the Ross River Dena Council has not signed what's called the Yukon Umbrella Final Agreement, which is a land claim process here in Yukon, they have not agreed to the mechanisms of environmental regulation through which Faro is now proceeding. And so they're also resisting the state-led assessment process and are undertaking their own socio and technical assessment alongside the regional one. Okay. And so for my research methods here, I'm taking a participatory action-based research approach that's aimed at community intervention and remediation assessment and planning, in the context of controversies over sovereignty land and the scope and definition of remediation. So I work for Ross River Dena Council, both as a researcher and also as a contractor, and I support their environmental assessment and I gather pertinent information regarding Ross River's story of the Faro mine. So currently we're working on a community report that's meant to center Ross River's story of the Faro mine, and so that will be public for other regulators that are looking at this project right now. We've also completed interviews with community members and done a pretty deep archival dive in all of this information. And their negotiations on this site before. A lot of the work is also then directed towards interviews with remediation scientists, advisors, regulators in a study up approach. And so these research methods are directed at both supporting community needs and also focusing critique and analysis on systems of power and constraint. And a few examples, just really quickly, of some of the other kind of fun things we get to do on the ground is we've been working on a tree planting program with Casca Youth, kind of bringing into play all of these critiques of a remediation system.
Sorry, Kathleen, but we're really running out of time. If you can conclude in a few minutes. I'm really sorry to interrupt you.
Okay, I will let Arn take it up then.
Great. We'll have, I'm sure, an opportunity maybe to chat with people in more detail about some of the activities. But the second location is actually an active mine, so not an abandoned mine in northern Quebec. It's the Raglan mine in the Inuit territory of Nunavik, close to the communities of Saluit and Kangetsujuak, which have an impact and benefit agreement with the mine. Here, the mine is expanding its operations and is projected to close in 2041. And is through the discussions with the communities, questions around the impacts of closure, particularly around tailings management, but now expanding to a wider set of considerations, has been raised there. You get a picture of the mine site down there. This is an Arctic, a very remote Arctic location, but certainly with a large number of very interested land users in the region. Here we are engaged we've been included in this joint industry, Inuit and university community that's conducting a participatory review of the mine closure plan, bringing together technical knowledge, Inuit knowledge, and research, including social researchers to work together to move away from technically driven closure and remediation processes towards more inclusive that really amount to a kind of experiment in very long-term planning and engagement, and an attempt to really foreground Inuit futures who are ultimately going to be the inheritors of this landscape once the mine is closed, and to ensure that their knowledge, priorities, and practices are incorporated not merely in a one-off consultative type of process, but actually an inclusive long-term planning process. So just to conclude with all of this that we've talked about, again, we're building on this notion of an ethics of remediation and trying to consider processes by which Indigenous environmental justice, reconciliation, and knowledge can be incorporated into what are normally highly technical and largely exclusionary remediation and post-mining landscape planning processes. From a theoretical and methodological perspective, again, we're drawing on this notion of cosmopolitical experiments within so-called hybrid forums, which decenter technical expertise and embrace what Matthias Gross calls ignorance and surprise, and avoiding closure in the sense of foreclosing on different forms of debate, controversy, and knowledge. And this, of course, involves some degree of reflexivity on our part, in the sense that we are not only observing these activities, but also engaged in them in certain ways. So we doing a lot of thinking with our collaborators of various kinds on our own accountability and engagement, and what that means for for us as researchers, as being even part of that experiment, and thinking about how how we can evaluate the results of these really very long-term and open-ended kinds of processes, especially in places where there is no final solution to any of these problems. As Caitlin mentioned, these are perpetually toxic sites that will require continuous environmental management long into the future. So we need to think about how we gauge success of these kinds of forums and these kinds of interventions on many different levels. So thanks to all of you. We'll be happy to discuss this further, hopefully in the round as the rest of the seminar proceeds today. And there's just a little bit of information on our funding and our partners in research, as well as the reference to the publication that Caitlin noted earlier. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Aaron and Kathleen. It was very interesting. So we can have 5-10 minutes for the debates. If there are any questions for the previous presentations. No. We don't have the questions from the chat, no. So do not hesitate to ask your questions, if any. Okay, so no questions.
No, maybe an observation about this presentation, but it's been a bit frustrating. You didn't see the video. The way it was presented was not very clear, but I don't know if you noticed that the raglan mine was represented in the project of one of our students, the same example you were showing. And the students is imagining to do a different approach. So that discussing what is the future and how to reclaim, or the question of toxic landscape, and so when the mine closes, what about using in a different way the mining companies to work in collaboration with the Inuit now, giving them the most advanced technologies. There are, all the mining industry in Canada, but also all around the world, is moving to 4.40. One of the problems of the Inuit is, for example, the lack of connectivity. That is being an enormous problem, as shown very clearly during the pandemic. So they didn't have access to schooling, this and that, because the internet connection is terrible in the north of Canada. But what about using the facilities of these big mining companies and give this access to the Inuits that and create stations for 3D printing, thinking about alternative energy. That's the other big problem in the north and of the Inuit communities. They don't have access to electricity, which is a joke in a way, and it costs a fortune, and they have to use diesel. So what about working in and using, these incredible technologies that is used by the mining company to create a better present? And so I think it's reductive to think only about the question of the toxic landscape that is left behind, and how to instead to work right now on a sort of synergy between the super technologies and money is coming from this company and from extraction, there's such a problem. They have, incredible problem education, the crime, so internet connections, energy, all of these shortages. So this is for them, in fact, to think about change, it's a luxury compared. Okay, so this is what the sort of discussion we're doing precisely about this example that you were proposing. So to expand and extend and to rethink. So we titled that particular section of rethinking the actor and how they can manage. So, and it's not just a question, and actually climate justice, exactly. The Inuit climate justice, they don't have the luxury to think about the environment right now. So let's give them the basic to make them think about the environment in a more productive way. Okay, I stop here. It's a comment, it's not a question, but I thought it was interesting to discuss with you, or maybe we can do it during the roundtable.
Yeah, thank you. It's very, very interesting to consider these territories as being worthy, and not and to consider that the people living there don't take advantage of all the resources that are taken them from, or something like that. And I just had a question for maybe Elena and Alessandra. I thought the parallel between agriculture and mining, considering that these territories have been like abused, I mean the same way than mining abused territories, and agriculture did too. I mean, it's like the same strategies, for example, something like that. And do you have examples where in Nord-Pas-de-Calais, in a mining basin in north of France, what's interesting is that the mining basin took place in agricultural territory, very rural territory. And it seems like today, what we've seen through the examples, the portraits of mining territories, that most of them are in agricultural places. So that could be very interesting to really think. I mean, that's what you showed, Alexandra, with your some of your student projects, that there are connections to make between remediation and agriculture, and that's what maybe what the territorialists work on too, considering that agriculture has a great power of transforming these territories. Well, it's not really a question, but I thought that this parallel was very interesting and rich.
Yes, Beatrice, I'd like to react, in fact, maybe suggesting that the opportunity to see this relation and this sort of maybe cohabitation also of the domain of agricultural activities and the mining ones, certainly in terms also of the way in which this cohabitation has evolved through times, because it is not excluded that also people living in that region could have experienced some conflicts between of the crafts related to one domain and the other. Maybe the way in which also the métier and the professions and the skills were practiced by population could have been not always peacefully, shared or yeah, a peaceful cohabitation. Maybe there was some conflicts that are parts of the, sort of collective memory. And in dealing with the present issues related to agriculture, to energy, to productivity, sometimes could be very important to resituate in a quite long term in order to be more precisely, specifically able to deal with specific situations.
I can add something, but again, Canada and Quebec are always so interesting because they're very specific and extreme in what they do. So, like dealing with the resource extraction or dealing with problems of colonizations and ethics, etc. And Quebec is especially interesting. So this region, the north, based on agriculture and settlement of French-speaking Canadian, which are, it can be considered, and they want to be considered as sort of minority too. So there is a question of north, quite north, but and so it was, the land to be colonized for agriculture. And this process of colonization was led by the Catholic Church. So a very interesting process and a very strange way of operating. And developing new forms of agriculture exactly for a Nordic climate. So what can grow there? So the second wave of, or more or less contemporary with this, which was end of the 19th century. And then we started with cutting the forest, of course, it was inhabited, this land, also by the Algonquin, that was the native of the region. So, and then 1920s, they start mining because there is gold, nickel and copper. And so there is a sort of a rush to gold. But all these free activities are superimposed. And the actors move from one to the other. So sometimes the peasant is working also for forestry to compensate. So the farm is not producing enough, so they go and do the winter and so on and so forth. And then they move to mining because mining is paid better. And the mining change because they move from underground to open pit of the transformation action and grow, because to make work of the scierie and the past and paper production, they need huge amount of energy, incredible connections. In this region that is just about, extracting resources. And it's all, different actors, the evolving, the super evolving, fast evolving of the technologies they're using. And then, so it's about colonizations, process of extraction, materiality. And this is the exercise we did with the students. First of all, we started to do maps at the planetary scale. Why? Because all these resources of Canada, Canada export resources. So the destiny of the past and paper, the cutting of the timbers in in Quebec depends on how many newspapers are printed in the US. If there are no more printing, there is a collapse of this entire industry. And the same for the price of minerals. So it depends on the world market of minerals and where they go. So we have to understand this logic of exchange, because it's all the life of cities, settlements, and towns is dictated by the world market of materials and resources. So in order to understand the life of a village in Abitibi or at the price of nickel and copper, and the request of nickel and copper is on the world market. So it's, you know, at what scale should we be thinking, and how, and what are the actors? Can we have new ways of rethinking the connection between the different actors? And the question of technologies, of information technologies, that is transforming in a radical way everything. This contribution to the conversation.
Okay. Okay, it works. It works. So we should start with the debates, and we propose you to listen to our students that will make a very short presentation of their workshop and exposition that you saw in the next room.
For 1 week, we had about 15 students working on a workshop called New Materials, New Ornaments, and there's a little exhibition here where they show what they made with bioplastic and earth, and how these materials can reveal a new way of talking about ornaments in architecture. So the relationship between this workshop and this seminar today and post-mining territories is probably the idea that these territories that were abused and raped in their ground, maybe today they can become places for innovation and taking care of territories, and maybe finding new materials to new methods for working in these places. So they will shortly talk about it.
Yes. Hello. Okay. Yes. So the title of the exhibition in the other room is Infinite Resources, New Building Materials. And we have tried to create, we've tried to experiment with the concept of ornamentation and how ornamentation can be used in architecture, and how we can create a new language for the materials. So from the mainland, we collected a lot of waste, a lot of plastic waste. And then from Murano, which is an island near Venice, we collected glass. So we went to a factory and collected scraps of glass. And then Lido is the beach side of Venice, and we collected some shells to then experiment by mixing these 3 ingredients. And we divided in 2 groups, and one group experimented with earth and also waste plastic. Mm-hmm.
One of the idea of the workshop was to experiment with people, so to have like a kind of participatory approach. because yeah, we think that mud and bioplastic can be friendly materials to work with and to interact with. And so we had people to participate and to experiment also with those materials and to experiment with ornaments. And maybe, yeah, it was to create like a kind of new aesthetic based on, I don't know, like a popular aesthetic, instead of like staying only with architects, and sometimes we have like a too elitist aesthetic. And we also had like 5 lectures during this week. The first one was by Antoine Picon, and he talked about ornament as a pleasure, let's say, the pleasure of ornaments. The second one was by Frédéric Epo, and he was talking about like carpentry archaeology, like how old wood frames were made like in the medieval times, and how it relates to the forests and the way materials were made at this time. I did the third one about like aesthetics and bio-based material, and Beatrice Mariol did the fourth one about William Morris and aesthetics and how we can be disobedient as architects. And the fifth one was made by the Les Bâtisseuses, which is like a collective office, kind of, yeah, French women working with mud, and also we have like a participatory approach about working with mud. Okay.
Thank you very much. So we propose you to move to the next part of the day, which will be the roundtables with brainstorming activities. But before, I would like to make a very small presentation to present these brainstorming activities. I promise I will not show any maps in my presentation, so it will be quite short, I hope. Yeah, so it was obvious. Thank you. It's okay. Yeah, good. Okay, so post-mining network goals, public and exchanges. Doesn't work. Oh. I don't. It's too far. Okay. Yeah. So the idea is to create the international post-mining network that will gather different actors working in area of architecture, urbanism, design, landscape, social issues, actually what we have today with you. And as we already mentioned, it is an already supported initiative. So the chair, Acclimatize post-mining territories, has already received the support, the financial support and other types of support from French Ministry of Culture, Caisse des Dépôts, Mission Bassin Minier, Maison Cité, European Cultural Center, EasyCarp Network. And I want to say a few words about the upcoming projects. So we have recently won a grant at University and Leuven University in Belgium. So we plan to organize a cycle of conferences and seminars during the autumn and the winter. And the next big seminar is planned for the February 2022, and it will happen in Mining Basin in the northern France. So we are welcomed. So it's very important to have the financing for the projects, of course. And we have already identified some possibilities, and especially the European projects, especially in the fields of regional and urban development, employment, social inclusion, agriculture, and rural development, and many other. So we identified two possibilities for funding. Of course, there are many other, I imagine. The first one is Erasmus Plus Key Action 2. It's a project program that allows the cooperation in the field of the higher education. And another program is the Creative Europe program. So it supports projects in different cultural and creative fields. And it's important to know that the architecture and cultural heritage sectors are among the priority sectors. So there are different types of the projects, which are small, medium, and large scale projects. And it goes from 200 to 1,000 euros up to 2 million euros per project. And the project should not exceed the 48 months of duration. So in the architecture sector, actually, we could apply to in the projects that will meet such priorities as reinforce the capacity of European architects in communication, co-creation, and mediation with citizens and relevant stakeholders in design, planning, and building processes. The integration of the Green Deal and in particular the new European Bauhaus principles in the practices. So European Green Deal, it's a set of policies that was set up by European Commission in aim to reduce the CO emissions and make the Europe climate neutral by 2050. And the last one, the internationalization of careers in Europe and beyond. So the cultural heritage sector can be represented for us in reinforcing the capacity of the cultural professionals, engagement, and mediation with citizens, the communication and present digitalization of cultural heritage material, sites, and historical buildings, including the use of 3D, and risk management for cultural heritage with a focus on prevention and risk preparedness in relation to natural and non-natural hazards, including climate change adaptation and mitigation in accordance with the principles of the European Green Deal. I would like also to say a few words about the new European Bauhaus program, which seems quite interesting. It's actually a platform that will mobilize designers, architects, engineers, scientists, students, and other creative minds across disciplines to reimagine sustainable living in Europe and beyond. So it will provide financial support to innovative ideas and products through calls for proposals and through coordinated program included in the multi-annual financial framework network. So this platform will be open from September 2021, so from this September, very soon. And that's all. Okay, so now we would like to divide you in small groups. Here we have the repartition of the groups. So just do not hesitate to put your chairs together and aim to put you comfortably. And we thought that the first table will be French speaking. We put together the people that speak French more than English. And we would like you to work on following questions. So there are 5 questions. Actually, the first one is, what is the goal of the post-mining network? The second one, how each member can contribute, what activities can be undertaken within the network, what results are expected, how the target group can benefit from the network, what impacts innovation for your territory can be reached thanks to the network, and the last one, how do you see the continuity of the network? What will need to be done? What resources will be necessary to continue? Yeah, so I actually would like to work together with you, as long as we are all here, to think. Yes, we also have the person which are online on Zoom. We will also put you on the in one group because there are not a lot of people. And I will send you these questions in the chat.